You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tammy Urbanic.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on Spreaker.com and on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. I'm Tammy Urbanic. Journey for Truth is always on demand and with many new episodes. Visit my website, empowermentthroughhealing.org, and you can peruse my website or just simply sign up for my newsletter. It is free. There's an awesome website that you really want to visit called lifeenergyflowtaiyi.com. Taiyi is spelled T-A-I-Y-I, Taiyi. There you're going to see the benefits of Taiyi, how it works, the history behind Taiyi, and really how it can benefit you and your healing, whether it's your emotional, mental, physical healing, regardless. It works on all levels. So again, go to lifeenergyflowtaiyi.com. My guest this week is TJ Woodward. TJ is a spiritual author, speaker, and host of Awakened Living TV. TJ, welcome.
Thank you, Tammy. It's a delight to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
How did you first become interested in working with spirituality?
You know, from a very early age, I became interested in spirituality. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, which I'm so grateful for. And one of the things about being in that environment was there was so much incredible energy in the church. And I always felt some kind of deep connection to myself and to spirit. Early in my 20s, I became exposed to Eastern thought through my friend Mary Helen. She's the person I dedicate my book to. She was a devotee of Sai Baba's in India, and it was then that I first started hearing about this inner journey, like looking at spirituality through the lens of an inner journey, and it resonated so deeply with me. So really all of my life, spirituality has been a focus of my life and an interest.
That is awesome. How did you shift from the religious piece to more of a spirituality piece?
That is such a great question. You know, I'm so grateful for the Episcopal Church because I hear so many people that grew up in religion where they felt there was something wrong with them or some idea of a punishing God. I am so fortunate that was not at all present or prevalent in the church I grew up in. Good. However, there was an idea of a God out there somewhere, and that was certainly, you know, what kids in school were saying too. You know, the whole idea of good and bad and right and wrong and heaven and hell.
Right.
And so when I came into Eastern thought and Buddhism and Hinduism, and I started to hear about the inner journey and the idea that what we might call God is it's who we are and lives within us, it resonated so instantly that I feel like it was just an instant shift for me into moving toward an inner journey. Of course, that journey has been years in the unfolding, but that was definitely the beginning for me.
You know, a lot of people, I've worked with many who have left religion and they've moved into more of a spirituality and learning of spirituality, and they have found themselves, in many cases, their families didn't follow them. So their families decided to stay within the church, typically within a church that believed in a punishing God. And then the person that I might be working with wanted to move into a spirituality, and they felt in many cases alone and isolated. But it doesn't sound like that was your case.
Well, I think the key to it, and I also work with a lot of people in that transition of, you know, having an inner yearning for something that may be different or more than their church or their religion they grew up in. And the idea of community or creating a community is such an important part of it because otherwise I think we can feel isolated and alone. So I was very fortunate to be exposed to and involved with a group of people where I can be on this journey in community. I think it's such a vital, important part of it.
Most certainly, having that sense of community. What about the individuals who don't feel like their families support that choice in moving into spirituality and away from organized religion?
Well, I think one of the keys that for me early in spirituality, I had an idea that I needed to reject. And I'll just own that I had judgment of people that wanted to stay in a more religious path. I think a big piece of it is for those of us who are on a spiritual journey is to have compassion for anyone where they're at. Mm-hmm. We know that that's, you know, the issue of the world, right? Like I have the right answer and you don't. So on the face of it, what I would invite people to do is just to accept that they are on their own path and that they don't actually, their families might, for the rest of their life, enjoy their religion of origin.
Mm-hmm. That's the great advice. Definitely having that compassion and that understanding that everyone's on their own journey.
Right.
Now, where did you get the title Conscious Being?
It came from an Eckhart Tolle quote from his book, A New Earth, and the quote is, "Conscious being leads to conscious doing." I had spent so much of my life as a doer. It was all about action. It was all about external action and feeling like if I just do enough, I will be enough. And of course, what I've come to understand through my own awakening process is that that's backwards, right? So This is about waking up and becoming conscious and then letting right action follow naturally. So that's where the title came from.
Well, that leads me perfectly to my next question. You do talk about consciousness, and I'm sure many of the listeners know what that word means. They have an understanding of what that word means or how to put it into some sort of construct. How do you define consciousness for perhaps those who are not real familiar with the meaning behind it?
Well, I think there's two different types of consciousness. There's one, you could say consciousness with a capital C, which is ultimate consciousness. That could be used interchangeably with God or source or love or spirit, where that's the unchangeable principle that is spirituality or God or source. Human consciousness is really what I'm talking about in my book, because that's the way we perceive. So it can be used interchangeably with our ability to perceive. So as we expand consciousness, we can expand our understanding, our perspective, and our viewpoint of ourselves in the world.
How would one attempt to expand their consciousness?
Well, I think, it's interesting. That question often arises. And for me, in my experience and working with people, and certainly in my own journey, there were many different moments that defined a turning point for me, or a gateway or a doorway to walk through. One seems to be when people, for whatever reason, their way of doing it quits working. So that could be an illness, that could be a divorce, that could be the kids go off to school. Something happens in the outer realm where they have an opportunity to say, wow, something isn't working in this way, or this pain can be a threshold or a doorway into new life. Sometimes it's, a spontaneous spiritual experience. I think most of us have had that, where it seems like it comes from nowhere, where we recognize our oneness. We return to this state of presence and curiosity. And that experience, that peak experience, creates a desire. And I use desire in the way of it pulls us into a desire for more love, more compassion, and more oneness in our life.
As you are aware, I'm sure, we're surrounded by a consciousness of anger and fear for the most part, and then other elements of depression and trauma, a lot of trauma actually. How does a person who might be in the midst of that separate themselves from that level of consciousness into one of their own individual consciousness so they can achieve that expansion?
I think you're speaking so profoundly to the fundamental focus of my book. There are really two focuses. One is operating under the premise or the knowing that we come into this world whole and perfect. And that term doesn't always work for everybody, because I don't mean perfect like we do it perfectly, but there's a perfection at the core of who we are. And then we become domesticated. We get taught all of these things about fear and about separation and competition. So that's the main point of my book, and then also that we can experience reality based on our level of conscious awareness. So what I would say to someone, first and foremost, is that this is not about learning, it's about unlearning. So it's unlearning all those ideas and those beliefs we've been taught, so that we can, what I call the great remembering of our essential nature. So community is important. I think when we're talking about trauma, which, if you think about coming into this world absolutely connected to presence and with the curiosity of life and awe for life, and then we get taught all these other things, the domestication part is actually traumatic. So I think it's important to have someone in your life that can help you witness that and dismantle some of that, so that we can let go of those strategies that keep us stuck in an old way of living.
I completely agree. I work with many people outside of the United States, specifically in Greece, And as I'm sure you're aware, that Greece is in an economic and political crisis. And through conversation with them, it is so important to do what you were talking about, creating community, having people around you who support you, so that you don't get stuck and caught in that fear-based mentality that is so prominent right now in Greece, the United States as well, but Greece is significantly peaking, and to work with your support system and your close friends and being able to see beyond that fear that's being presented to the public.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, when we lived a life from the outside in, which many of us have, especially, you know, I think in Western culture, we're really trained from a very early age. Some of us even got that in religion. There's something wrong with me,
right,
and I need to fix it from the outside. And when we're dependent upon externals for our sense of safety, when you know, unrest happens, when conflict happens in the world, when devastating events happen, when we don't have a solid sense of who and what we really are, we're very shaken by that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, paradoxically, that can be a real opportunity for people to awaken and to start living from the inside out. But of course, we don't want to minimize the pain that people experience when things in the outer realm, you know, either crumble or began to fall apart. I think it's an important thing to honor the pain as well.
Mm. Now, also, let's talk about ego. How do you see ego playing in our lives one way or the other?
Well, you know, it's interesting because ego is one of those terms that I hear people talk about in a lot of different ways. And mm-hmm. early in my life, I thought the goal was to get rid of the ego. And it's Dr. Sue Morter, I heard her speak at the Agape International Spiritual Center, and she said quite simply, only ego would want ego to die. And that just really resonated with me because ego is very important, right? It's our personality itself. It's our thoughts, our beliefs. It can be obviously really important because without ego, we would be living in caves, right? We would not have been able to create in the way that we do. Mm-hmm. The issue for most of us is that we believe we are our ego. We believe we are our thoughts, our collection of stories and beliefs, our opinions, our intellect. And that is very limited, and it keeps us stuck in a way of being that's very finite rather than infinite. So the spiritual journey for me isn't about getting rid of the ego. It's about seeing it for what it is. It's a very powerful tool for us to create and to live in this world, and it's not who we are. Who we are is not that.
One way that I've been taught, kind of the concept that you're talking about, is that we have, or many people have a negative ego. And then there's ego, and then there's negative ego. And I've been taught all my life that negative ego is actually hidden fear. And when you have a person who is living within and through their hidden fear, that then have this expanded ego, meaning they get caught up in the concept of, I have to be better than that person, I have to be better than this person, I have to compete, so on and so forth, which I'm sure, as you're talking about and you know, is very damaging. And self-limiting. So I think it's kind of the same thing, maybe different words, but really understanding our own unique personality without getting caught up in being our thoughts and being our ego.
Absolutely. And the way I frame it, I think I say this in the book, in the awakened state, personality becomes a vehicle for spirit. So we could say ego would serve spirit, but for many of us, and for me, for much of my life, spirit was it was in the back seat. Ego was running the show because I felt broken. I felt there was something wrong. Mm. There was something inherently not right internally. So I believed that I could create my externals in a particular way so that I would be okay. That's quite simply said, that's the negative aspect of ego, right? That's using ego to try to fix something, first of all, that's not broken in the first place. So, releasing or letting go or witnessing, whatever word we use, that ego, it becomes right-sized, becomes balanced. And then it can be a very powerful tool. Like, our personalities can actually serve us very well if we're intending to use that as a way to bring spirit into the world.
Mm. Beautifully said. Now, our mind, you were talking about thoughts and not being our thoughts, but really looking at what thoughts we carry, what thoughts we're practicing, how does our mind help us and how does it hurt us?
Well, there's the big question, isn't it? That's really the fundamental issue with this thing we call humanity. So our minds are very powerful, of course, and they're very creative. And so it gets tricky when we talk about this, because what I'm not saying is the goal is to be completely out of our minds, although that's a conversation we could have ongoing. The goal or the intention for me is to recognize that the mind isn't who we are. So most of us are walking around quite asleep. In other words, we have no idea what that inner dialogue is. And that inner dialogue is actually what creates what we call reality, right? So one way to say it is, if I have decided the world is not safe, I can find plenty of evidence to support that belief.
Right.
So the unexamined mind will just go around believing the world is unsafe, and it feels like it's happening to us, and we're in a state of consciousness where we don't recognize there's some internal change that can happen in order to affect the way we experience our external realm.
So that's a way that it hurts us. Well, let's talk about a way that specifically our higher mind, but even our mind in general, can assist us, whether it's through creativity, imagination.
The creative process is such a great example. I mean, I can use a very, very real-time example. Awaken Living is my spiritual community in San Francisco, and we were in the chapel at Fort Mason for about a year, and they let us know that they're going to be using it for something else, and we needed to find a new home. So when the mind takes over, it starts coming up with action plan and goals, and we need to do this, and these are the actions. It gets very active. When we allow ourselves to tap into vision or to spirit or to intuition, we allow that to emerge. Once we get clear, that's the conscious being part, then the mind is incredibly useful, because once we have a clear picture of what we're wanting to manifest, then there's these incredible action steps. There are things we need to do in the outer realm. Sometimes I think it's easy for us in the spiritual world to just say, well, I just trust the universe, and I know the universe will supply. And that, although that's incredibly true, there's also action to be taken, and that's where the mind comes in, and that's how it can be really the vehicle or the creative force that can deliver spirit.
Well, and everything you're talking about is in the direction and on the concept of raising consciousness, how to raise consciousness, or the benefits, rather. Can you give a couple of simple steps that a person who might be new to this concept could begin taking to at least understand what raising consciousness means on a deeper level?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great teacher once that said there are 3 steps to this. Step 1 is awareness, step 2 is awareness, and step 3 is awareness. So what we want to do is invite ourselves to really become the witness to our life. We have to first, it seems that we have to first understand fundamentally that the world isn't happening to us. Once I understand that, then I recognize that awareness can bring me into a way of seeing in what way am I keeping my life limited. So in a tangible way, what works for me is to use something that I call the questioning, living in the question. There's a lot of people talking about this now. Our mind always wants to have the answer. But the answers are always based on what the mind knows. So living in the question allows us to expand. And how this would look is, if I'm in a situation in my life that's frustrating, I might ask a series of questions like, what is my role in this? What is my part in this? What would I really like to see here? What would I have to let go of in order to live the life of my dreams? So being in the question rather than having the mind come up with answers is one I think, pretty powerful tool.
Exactly. That's an excellent step. Allowing your mind to create a question, allowing your intuition to create a question, allowing your mind to help form that into words and articulate it to ourselves, and then allowing the intuition to answer that question. I love the self-dialoguing and the self-questioning. I really see it as being really on a journey of self-discovery.
Absolutely, absolutely. And and our mind, we're trained from such an early age that we're supposed to have all the answers.
Right.
That's the way most of our education is set up, although I know that's changing. Certainly when I was in school, it was about memorizing and getting the right answer.
Right.
So this practice takes some practice, to be able to live in a question rather than answer it, and to just be with the question for a couple of days and see what emerges from that inner wisdom.
Exactly. It's a process, just as you're stating, and I've said that to a lot of people as well. This is not about perfection. It's about a process.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, given that, some people may see this, okay, well, this is a lot of work. Might be a lot of steps. What might one see as a result of doing the work and putting in the effort? If we can give them, or everyone, a concrete example of a result they might see.
Yeah, for example, I'll give one of the ever popular ones. So a lot of people will come to me, in my counseling practice and say something like, I want to create the perfect job or find the perfect job, or even more often, I'm looking for my soulmate, or I'm looking for the perfect partner. Mm-hmm. And then they might go about that by making a list of goals and, being in the right place, and how do I reach out to other people. And when we live in the question, we begin to unravel the way we've always done things. So as we question that and the reason the work is, if we call this work, the benefit is more freedom, more trust of the inner process. So an example of, we use the example of looking for the perfect partner. We might start to ask questions of ourselves, right? Like, what does it mean to me to have the perfect partner? Who am I willing to become in order for this to happen in my life? What might I want to let go of so that I can open up to this possibility? That's very different than trying to make it happen. So the benefit in any time we use this process is more freedom, more connection, and more ease. Don't we all want a life filled with a lot more ease rather than struggle?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you host Awakened Living TV. What is Awakened Living?
Awakened Living TV. Awakened Living is the name of our spiritual community in San Francisco, and then also the name of my radio show and TV show. The TV show is dedicated, I interview people, healers of all types, therapists, authors, ministers, anyone who's in this conversation about awakening and awakening consciousness in the 21st century. It's been a real honor. I think I've had about 75 episodes now over the last couple of years.
Wow.
I try to bring on people with diverse viewpoints, and it's really fun being that conversation.
That sounds awesome. Now, what is the takeaway you'd like to leave with us today?
The takeaway, simply what I would like for people to know, is that we do have the ability to change what we call reality. And I don't mean in some kind of magic way, but what I mean is as I'm willing to dismantle and let go of the collection of stories and beliefs that I've held, I can open up to a new way of being and seeing that is much more connected with who and what I really am. Life can be easy. Life can be wonderful. We can have absolute freedom and connection. It is possible, and it's possible through unlearning and returning to the truth of who and what we are.
And where can people find your book and your information?
tjwoodward.com is the best place to find me. I meet with people in San Francisco individually to help them with their awakening process, and I also meet with people on Skype and FaceTime worldwide. At tjwoodward.com, you can also find out about my book, Conscious Being, and our community in San Francisco.
Excellent. Well, thank you, TJ, for being a guest on my show this week.
Well, thank you, Tammy, and thank you for the great work you're doing in the world.
Thank you, and thank you, listeners, for joining me here as well on Journey for Truth, now on Spreaker.com. Until next time, have a fantastic week.